They laughed when I walked into his wedding alone. His mistress poured red wine down my dress in front of 200 guests and called me the broke ex-wife. Nobody in that room knew my last name. Nobody knew who my brother was. Until his black cars pulled up outside. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought you were beneath them, stay with me till the end because this story is for you. And before we go further, follow along because you don't want to miss how this one ends. My name is Simone, and for most of my adult life, I made myself small on purpose. Not because I didn't know my worth, but because I learned early that people change the moment they find out what you have. They stop seeing you and start seeing what you can give them. So when I met Elijah, I never told him about my family. I never told him that my brother Xavier was quietly becoming one of the wealthiest men in the country. I just wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I came from. Elijah was charming in the beginning. He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room. We met when I was 24, still finding my footing, still figuring out who I wanted to be outside of my family's shadow. He didn't know about Xavier's success back then because honestly, Xavier's success hadn't fully happened yet. We were just two young people building something from nothing, and I loved that. I loved that Elijah loved me before the world knew my name. We got married in a small ceremony, nothing extravagant. I paid for half of it myself, working nights at a marketing firm while going to school. Elijah was proud in his own way of building something with his own hands. But somewhere along the way, as the years passed and my brother's business empire quietly exploded into headlines and magazine covers, something in Elijah started to shift. He started noticing the gap between the life he had and the life he thought he deserved. He started resenting the fact that I never used my family's name to help us get ahead, even when things got tight. I want to be honest with you. I wasn't perfect either. I was stubborn about keeping my world separate. I thought I was protecting our marriage by keeping it pure, untouched by money and status. But looking back now, I think Elijah felt like I was hiding something from him, even though what I was really doing was trying to hide myself from becoming someone people only loved for what she could provide. The cracks became canyons. Elijah started staying out later. He started talking about ambition in a way that felt like an accusation directed at me, like my simplicity was the reason he wasn't further along in life. And then I met her, Brianna. She came into the picture slowly, the way these things always do, a coworker. A friend of a friend, someone who laughed a little too long at his jokes, who always seemed to be around when I wasn't. Brianna was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. She wore her ambition like perfume, something you could smell before she even walked into the room. She wanted things, status, attention, a certain kind of life, and she looked at Elijah like he was a stepping stone to get there. I found out the way most women find out. Not through some grand confession, but through small inconsistencies that piled up until the truth was impossible to ignore. A phone left unlocked. A late-night message that wasn't meant for my eyes. When I confronted Elijah, he didn't even fight for us. He just looked relieved that the truth was finally out, like he'd been waiting for permission to leave. We divorced quietly. No big drama, no lawyers screaming across a table. Just two people signing papers that ended something that used to mean everything. But here's the part that still stings when I think about it. Elijah told people I couldn't keep up with his ambitions. He told our mutual friends that I was holding him back, that I didn't dream big enough, that I was content with a small life while he wanted more. And people believed him because I never corrected the story. I never told anyone that the truth was the opposite. I was the one who could have given him more than he ever imagined, and I chose not to because I wanted him to love me, not my name. After the divorce, I rebuilt my life slowly. I moved into a modest apartment. I focused on my career. I let myself grieve the version of my life I thought I was going to have, and through all of it, I still didn't reach out to Xavier for help. Not because we weren't close, we were in our own quiet way. He would call me every few weeks, check in, ask if I needed anything. But I always said I was fine because I didn't want my recovery to be handed to me. I wanted to build it myself, brick by brick, the same way I built everything else. 2 years passed, I found peace. I found a rhythm to my life that felt honest and mine, and then the invitation came. Elijah was getting married to Brianna, of course. And somehow, in some twisted display of guilt or arrogance, he decided to invite me to the wedding. I stared at that envelope for 3 days before I opened it. Part of me wanted to throw it away and never think about it again. But another part of me, the part that had spent 2 years healing, wanted to prove to myself that I could walk into that room and feel nothing but peace. I wanted closure, and I convinced myself that showing up with grace was the way to get it. I didn't go with any plan for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't plotting anything. I simply wanted to attend, be polite, and leave with my dignity intact. I bought a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. I did my own hair. I drove myself there in my modest car and parked it among the luxury vehicles lined up outside the venue. feeling every bit like an outsider walking into a world that used to almost be mine. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. String lights wrapped around every column, white flowers cascading down long tables. A live band playing soft jazz as guests mingled with champagne glasses in hand. I found a seat near the back, away from attention, and I watched the ceremony unfold with a strange calm settling over me. Elijah looked happy, Brianna looked radiant, and I felt nothing but a quiet, distant sadness for the years I had spent trying to be enough for someone who was never satisfied. During the reception, I kept to myself. I made small talk with a few old acquaintances who seemed surprised and slightly uncomfortable to see me there. I could feel the whispers even when I couldn't hear the words. The ex-wife came. Can you believe it? I wonder why Elijah invited her. I ignored it all and focused on my glass of water, counting down the minutes until I could leave gracefully. That's when Brianna found me. She walked over with her champagne glass in hand, her dress fitting perfectly, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She looked me up and down slowly, the way people do when they want you to feel small. Simone, she said, my name sounding like an accusation in her mouth. I'm so glad you could make it. I know it must be hard, watching him build the life you couldn't give him. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, trying to figure out what she wanted from this moment. She continued, her voice loud enough for the people around us to hear. He told me everything, how you held him back, how you never believed in his dreams. It's a shame, really. Some women just aren't built for bigger things. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my face calm. I had learned a long time ago that reacting was exactly what people like her wanted. So I simply said, I hope you two are very happy together, and turned to walk away. That's when it happened. I don't know if it was intentional or if she truly was that clumsy, but as I turned, I felt the cold splash of red wine hit my chest, spreading down the front of my navy dress like a wound blooming open. Gasps rippled through the small crowd around us. Brianna's face wore a look of mock horror, but her eyes told a different story. Eyes that were satisfied. Eyes that had been waiting for a reason to humiliate me in front of everyone. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, she said, not sorry at all. I guess I don't know my own strength. Or maybe you should watch where you're standing, sweetie. This dress probably cost more than everything you own anyway. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to make my skin burn with humiliation. Enough to make me search the crowd for Elijah, hoping he would say something, anything in my defense. Instead, I found him standing a few feet away, a small, uncomfortable smile on his face, saying nothing, doing nothing. His silence confirmed everything I needed to know about the man I used to call my husband. I stood there for a moment, wine dripping down my dress, 200 pairs of eyes watching to see how I would react, and in that moment, something inside me went completely still. I wasn't angry in the way you'd expect. I felt something deeper, something quieter. A strange sense of clarity washed over me, like I was finally seeing everyone in that room for exactly who they were. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply reached for a napkin from the nearest table, dabbed at my dress calmly, and said, "Thank you for the excitement." I was starting to think this wedding was boring. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure of how to respond to my composure. Brianna's smile faltered slightly, clearly expecting tears or anger, not quiet defiance. I turned to walk toward the exit, ready to leave with whatever dignity I had left, when I heard the commotion begin outside. Voices at the entrance, hushed but urgent, the kind of energy that ripples through a room when something important is happening. I turned back just as the main doors of the venue opened, and a line of black cars became visible through the glass, their headlights cutting through the evening darkness. The wedding planner rushed toward the entrance, practically tripping over her own heels. The venue manager, a stern woman who had been overseeing every detail of the event with military precision, suddenly looked pale, whispering urgently into her earpiece. Guests began murmuring, craning their necks to see what was happening, and then he walked in. Xavier moved through that doorway like he owned the very air in the room, because in many ways he did. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that spoke of quiet, controlled power rather than flashy excess. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every step he took commanded attention without him ever raising his voice. I watched as the venue manager practically bowed as she greeted him, stammering something about being honored to have him there, apologizing for something I couldn't quite hear. That's when I understood. Xavier didn't just own a successful business. He owned this venue's parent company. Every wedding held in this building, every event, every dollar spent, ran through an empire that traced back to my brother. Xavier's eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, standing there with a wine-stained dress and a crowd of confused, whispering guests around me. His jaw tightened just slightly, the only sign of the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He walked toward me with purpose, ignoring the stunned faces turning to watch him, ignoring Brianna who had gone completely pale, ignoring Elijah who looked like he might be sick. "Simone," Xavier said, his voice soft but carrying easily across the silent room. Are you all right? I nodded, still processing the surreal shift happening around me. He gently touched my shoulder, a brotherly gesture that suddenly made the tears I had been holding back threaten to spill over. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief of being seen, of no longer standing alone in a room full of strangers who thought they understood my worth. The whispers around us grew louder as guests began putting the pieces together. That's her brother. Wait, is that Xavier? The Xavier. She's his sister. I watched realization spread across faces like wildfire, watched people who had been laughing moments before suddenly straighten up, suddenly reaching for their phones, suddenly desperate to understand who exactly they had been mocking. Brianna's face had drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Xavier turned his attention toward her, his expression unreadable but unmistakably intimidating. You must be Brianna, he said calmly. I heard what you did to my sister. I didn't mean it was an accident, she stammered, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. An accident, Xavier repeated, his voice cutting through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. You mocked her for not being ambitious enough, for holding a man back, and then you poured wine on her in front of everyone here. That doesn't sound like an accident to me. That sounds like cruelty. The silence in that room was suffocating. Every guest stood frozen, phones now openly recording, capturing a moment none of them wanted to miss. Xavier then turned his attention to Elijah, who had been trying to disappear into the background, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Elijah, Xavier said, walking toward him slowly, do you understand what you did, not just tonight but for years? You told people my sister held you back. You told people she didn't believe in bigger dreams. My sister could have given you a life you couldn't have imagined, but she chose to protect you from a world that changes people. She wanted you to love her, not her name. Elijah tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. You work for Whitfield Logistics, Xavier continued, his tone still calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. The company that just secured a major contract with my corporation last quarter. Effective tonight, that contract is under review, and effective tonight, you no longer work there. Gasps erupted around the room. Elijah's face went white, his career, his livelihood, unraveling in real time in front of everyone he had invited to celebrate his new beginning. You can't do that, Elijah finally managed to say, his voice cracking. This is my wedding. And that, Xavier said, gesturing toward my wine-stained dress, was my sister, humiliated in front of 200 people by a woman who married you for status she thought she was finally getting. I'm not ruining your wedding, Elijah. You did that yourself the moment you let someone disrespect the best thing that ever happened to you and said nothing. Brianna, sensing the entire foundation of her new marriage crumbling before her eyes, turned to Elijah with pure panic. You told me you had money, connections, that things were finally coming together for you, she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear despite her attempt at discretion. You didn't tell me you'd lose your job on our wedding night. Elijah tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away, already calculating her next move, already searching the room for an exit that didn't involve further embarrassment. The image of her scrambling away from the man she had just married, the same man she'd humiliated my dignity to marry, was something I will never forget. Xavier turned back to me, his expression softening completely as he looked at his little sister standing there in a ruined dress, finally free from years of carrying a secret that had cost her so much. Let's get you home, he said gently. As we walked toward the exit together, past guests who now looked at me with completely different eyes, past whispers that had transformed from mockery to something closer to awe, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication exactly, but a deep, settling peace. I hadn't asked for revenge, I hadn't planned any of this. I had simply lived my truth quietly, protected the people I loved without expecting anything in return, and let time and character reveal exactly who everyone really was. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's career never recovered. Word spreads fast in certain circles, and once people understood how he had treated the sister of one of the most respected businessmen in the country, doors that used to open for him closed one by one. Brianna left him within a month, moving on to chase status somewhere else, somewhere she hoped hadn't heard the story yet, but stories like ours have a way of traveling. As for me, I finally let Xavier help me the way he had always wanted to. Not because I needed saving, but because I finally understood that accepting support from people who love you isn't weakness. It's wisdom. I started my own consulting firm, something I had dreamed about for years but never pursued out of fear of being seen as riding on my family's success. Turns out my own hard work and quiet resilience were more than enough to build something beautiful, something entirely mine. Looking back now, I don't feel anger toward Elijah or Brianna anymore. I feel something closer to gratitude, strange as that sounds. They taught me that some people will only ever value you for what you can give them, and that real strength isn't found in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Real strength is found in quiet dignity, in refusing to shrink yourself just to be loved, and in trusting that the truth always finds its way to the surface, even when you're not the one trying to reveal it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were, I hope this story reminded you that your worth was never up for debate. Sometimes the people who try to humiliate you in your lowest moment are simply setting the stage for your quiet, undeniable rise. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today and follow along for more stories just like this one. And before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you truly were?